And boys and girls, welcome to my channel. I'm Ford Classic and welcome to BenchART. So for today, what do I have in here? So I have in here RAD. RAD, it is a roguelike game developed by the Double Fine Games and using Unreal Engine 4. Oh boy. And I'm here today to test my system, my old system, my HD 7850, which have similar performance to an R7 265 or an R7 370, since these three graphic cards share the exact amount of stream processors and same architecture revision. So to accompany this graphic card, I have 8 gigs of RAM and my own Phenom II X4, which have a decade old, 10 years old by now. So RAD, it is a indie game and a top view game, but still it is developed using Unreal Engine 4 and it is demanding. So I'm using borderless in here because the game defaults for it, but I'm running the game at 1080p and low settings. The game uses a 70% of resolution scaling, which makes the game close to 720p. So the requirements for this game are entirely bullshit, completely. These guys require an i5 2400 or an FX 8350, 4 gigs of RAM, and an AMD RX 470 or a GTX 780. Bullshit, entirely. And even for the they recommend an RX Vega. Really? This is completely fake news. It is completely fake. My system is miles and miles below of the minimum requirements, and I still can enjoy the game above 60 frames per second most of the time with the low settings with 70% of resolution scaling. Alright, and if you decide to have kind of an experience above 30 frames per second or something between 40 and 60, you can play the game on medium settings with this system. The only setting that is completely unplayable or mostly unplayable with this game, it is the eye settings with this PC, but all the rest, wherever, if you're going to play on medium settings with 85% of resolution scaling, you will have an experience above 30 frames per second. And if you are like me and you decide to have something around 60 frames per second or above, the low settings with 70% of resolution scaling, which is something it defaults when you decide to use low settings, your experience will be above 60 frames per second. So I don't really know what the hell requirements these guys are creating for the games, but they are completely fake. So, and I don't see the point, because anyone that looks at those requirements, they will think something like, oh my god, come on, I can't run this game. I have, for example, an RX 460, or let's imagine that you have a GTX 750 Ti, or something like this. When you look at those requirements, what you will think it is that you can't actually run that game. But then, people like me comes here to YouTube to prove you otherwise, that you can actually play the games, and they lose sales because of this. So I'm here to save them, in fact. I'm here to save these developers, because their games are not actually that demanding. What the hell? So yeah, you can actually play RAD with an HD 7850 and with a CPU with 10 years old, mostly above 60 frames per second. And in this video, the moments where you see those drops happening, they are mostly related with my AMD software recorder, because if you are not recording, you will actually get more performance than you are actually seeing in here. Although my minimum, average and maximum are without recording, alright? So, finishing this and the absolute minimum requirements that these guys decided to release that are completely fake, forgetting about that subject, the game itself, it is a roguelike game, which means that you will spend your time evolving your character, dying, losing those abilities that you evolve in your character, but earning upgrades otherwise that you can save. Alright, so you probably didn't understood anything, but I will explain carefully. So if you played Binding of Isaac, this is pretty much like it, alright? You get to these kind of tunnels or dungeons, and you get mutations which evolve your characters in the same way that the Binding of Isaac, for example, works. For example, you get mutations to fly, for example, like I got in here, you get mutations, for example, you got a brain above your brain that allows you to control, or, I mean, to, let's say that to put the enemies by your side, for example, and fight against the enemies. So you got a great amount of power-ups that you can evolve your character. The game it is challenging, alright, it is not for everyone. The boss fights are really challenging, but overall in a good way. That's what you should know, because I think the game it is actually pretty decent, and the price it is not that expensive. The game costs $19.99. Double Fine Games have a great reputation out there. They were the developers for Psychonauts. They were the developers of games like Brutal Legends. These games are very well known, and most of the people really enjoy the game. Steam users, most of them are enjoying the game, with 75% are recommended the game. Most of the people that are not satisfied with the game, it is related with the frame rate, because yes, the game it is demanding. Yes, we are currently playing the game on low settings. This feels bad because it is an indie game with these visuals, and yes, it is low settings, but nonetheless, and to be honest with you, I didn't notice too much big of a difference between the settings. The biggest difference that I did notice, it was between the low settings and the medium, where the clarity of the shadows on the medium settings were much better than with the low settings. The low settings, the shadows are very diffuse, you can barely notice them. But of course all the rest is much clarity. There is screen space reflections in this game, but since the angle of the image are like this, isometric, you don't really notice too much screen space reflections. Alright, so overall, even with the low settings, having an experience above 60 frames per second makes this game really playable and really enjoyable. So yeah, completely playable. I really don't get those requirements, guys. So with this, I'm going to shut up myself, let you enjoy a little bit of gameplay, and I do hope to see you soon. Goodbye. Think a lot.
The shops were run by the Cathode Raiders, who were way into artifacts and the 4:3 aspect ratio.
Unlocked. Juicy. Unlocked! Death averted. Jump. The way forward is open. Alpha mutants. You are not RAD. Yet.